Mara Vance stared through the observation glass at the Draconus hatchling. Its scales shimmered with iridescent blues and crimsons, catching the artificial light of the laboratory as it stretched its newly formed wings. The creature was no larger than a house cat. Yet Mara knew the destructive potential that lay dormant within its cells. She had dedicated the past 3 years to studying these remarkable beings, cataloging their biological adaptations and behavioral patterns with meticulous care. But today was different. Today, the Eden Initiative would begin the transformation of these magnificent creatures from subjects of scientific curiosity into something far more sinister. Beautiful, isn't she? The voice behind her belonged to Kalian, the enigmatic leader of the Eden Initiative. His tall, slender frame cast a long shadow across the laboratory floor as he approached. The last of her kind, as far as we know. Mara nodded without turning around. She's responding well to the atmospheric adjustments. Her respiratory system is adapting faster than the previous specimens. Kilian's reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. His silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight knot, accentuating the sharp angles of his face. The symbol of the Eden Initiative, a stylized tree encircled by flames, gleamed on the collar of his pristine white uniform. "You speak of her as if she were merely data, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice smooth as silk, yet edged with steel. "But she is so much more. She is the future, our future." 50 years had passed since the galactic collapse. The catastrophe had destroyed countless worlds, fracturing the once mighty Confederation into scattered pockets of survivors clinging to the remnants of civilization. From these ashes, the Eden Initiative had risen, offering hope and purpose to those who had lost everything. Mara had been among them, a brilliant ecological scientist whose family had perished when their research station was consumed by the spreading devastation. Now she stood on the threshold of a new era. The floating research station where she worked drifted through the void between systems, carrying its precious cargo of exotic life forms collected from the farthest reaches of the Chrysalix galaxy. The Draconus were the rarest and most fascinating of these specimens, reptilian creatures with the remarkable ability to generate and expel intense flames. "The Council has approved the next phase," Kalian announced, turning away from the glass to face the laboratory's team of scientists. "Tomorrow, we begin the purified fuel feeding protocol." A murmur of excitement rippled through the room. Mara felt her stomach tighten. "With respect, Kalian," she said, choosing her words carefully. "We haven't completed the behavioral impact studies. We don't know how the concentrated fuel will affect their cognitive functions." Kilian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your concern is noted, Dr. Vance, but the time for cautious observation has passed. The Confederation remnants grow stronger every day, rebuilding their military capabilities. We must be prepared to defend what we have built." Mara fell silent, watching as the Draconus hatchling curled into itself, its chest rising and falling with each breath. She had joined the Eden Initiative to preserve life, to understand and protect the extraordinary creatures that had survived the collapse. Now she found herself complicit in transforming them into weapons. That night, sleep eluded her. Images of burning worlds haunted her dreams, not the past destruction of the collapse, but a future conflagration sparked by the very beings she had sworn to protect. In the darkness of her quarters, Mara confronted the growing dissonance between her scientific dedication and her moral compass. Had she traded one form of destruction for another? The morning brought no clarity, only the inexorable forward march of Kalian's vision. Mara watched from the control room as the first Draconus specimen was exposed to the purified fuel, a substance harvested from the heart of dying stars, refined to its most volatile essence. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Draconis, now the size of a small shuttle, unfurled wings that seemed to absorb the light around them. Its body trembled as the fuel was absorbed into specialized organs that Mara had spent months documenting. Then, with a sound like the birth of a star, it exhaled a torrent of blue-white flame that engulfed the test asteroid in seconds. On the monitors, the rocky surface of the asteroid began to glow, then melt, then vaporize entirely. In less than a minute, nothing remained but a cloud of superheated particles drifting through the void. Applause erupted around her. Kalian stood at the center of the control room, his arms raised in triumph. "Behold the dawn of a new age," he proclaimed. "With the Dracones as our vanguard, we will cleanse the corruption that led to the collapse. We will forge a new order from the ashes of the old." Only Mara noticed the aftermath, the way the Dracones curled in on itself after the demonstration. Its movements erratic, its pupils dilated in what she recognized as distress. The creature had not evolved to channel such power. It was being forced to transcend its natural limitations, and the cost was written in its body language. "You're worried about them." The voice startled her from her observations. Riker Thane leaned against the doorframe of her laboratory, his muscular frame somehow managing to look both relaxed and alert simultaneously. The former Confederation soldier now served as the Eden Initiative's head of security, a position that placed him in an ethical quandary not unlike her own. "I'm worried about all of us," Mara replied, turning back to her data screens. "These creatures aren't meant to be weapons. We're pushing them beyond their biological parameters, and I can't predict the consequences." Riker moved closer, examining the behavioral charts displayed on her monitor. The jagged lines representing stress hormones and neural activity told a story that required no scientific expertise to interpret. "They're suffering," he said simply. "Yes." Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. "And Kalian knows it. He just doesn't care." Riker's expression darkened. "I've seen the deployment plans. He's not just creating a defensive capability. Mara, he's building an invasion force. The initiative is preparing to strike at the heart of the Confederation." The revelation shouldn't have surprised her, yet it landed like a physical blow. "Why? The Confederation is barely functioning. They're no threat to us." "They represent the old order, the one that failed to prevent the collapse. Kalian believes they must be eliminated entirely before his new vision can take root." Riker ran a hand through his close-cropped hair, a gesture Mara had come to recognize as a sign of his internal conflict. "I signed on to protect people, not to participate in a preemptive genocide." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Talia Soren, Kalian's most devoted disciple. Her severe beauty was accentuated by the high collar of her initiative uniform, and her eyes burned with the fervor of absolute conviction. "Kalian requests your presence in the Ascension Chamber. Dr. Vance," she announced, her gaze flicking dismissively toward Riker. Alone. The Ascension Chamber occupied the highest level of the research station, its transparent dome offering an unobstructed view of the cosmos beyond. Kalian stood at its center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the progress of the Draconis training program. "You've been avoiding me, Dr. Vance," he said without turning as Mara entered. "I've been analyzing the data from yesterday's demonstration," she replied. "The physiological strain on the specimen was considerable. We need to adjust the protocol if we want to avoid neural damage." Kalian waved his hand, and the displays changed to show a star system Mara recognized as Helios Prime, one of the most populous remaining Confederation strongholds. "In 2 weeks, we will launch the first phase of Operation Cleansing Fire," he said. "A squadron of 12 Dracones, led by our most advanced specimen, will target these industrial sectors." Red markers appeared across the holographic planets. "The Confederation will witness our power and submit to the inevitable." Mara struggled to keep her voice steady. "These are civilian centers. Millions will die." "Millions died in the collapse because the Confederation was too corrupt, too complacent to heed the warnings," Kalian countered, his voice rising with passion. Those deaths are on their hands. What comes next is merely the cost of rebirth. He turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the starlight from above. I chose you for this project because of your brilliance. Mara, your understanding of the Draconis biology is unparalleled, but I sense your resolve wavering. My commitment is to science, to understanding these creatures, Mara said carefully, not to using them as instruments of mass destruction. Killian approached her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of ozone that always seemed to surround him. The Eden Initiative is not a democracy. Dr. Vance, your expertise is valuable, but not irreplaceable. Remember that. The threat hung in the air between them as he swept past her, toward the exit. Talia will provide you with the updated feeding schedule. I expect your full cooperation. Alone in the chamber, Mara's gaze was drawn to the stars beyond the dome. Somewhere out there, millions of people were going about their lives, unaware that their fate was being decided in this sterile room. And somewhere, too, were the worlds from which the Draconis had been taken, worlds where they had once flown free, their fire a natural part of their ecosystem rather than a weapon to be harnessed. In that moment, Mara Vance made her decision. She would not be complicit in another catastrophe. Whatever the cost, she would find a way to stop Killian's crusade. The next week saw a flurry of activity throughout the research station. The Draconis underwent increasingly intensive feeding sessions, each one pushing their flame-generating capabilities to new extremes. Mara documented everything, feigning enthusiasm when Killian or his acolytes were present, while secretly compiling evidence of the physical and psychological damage being inflicted on the creatures. Riker became her ally in this covert resistance, using his security clearance to access restricted areas and communication channels. Together, they discovered the full scope of Killian's ambition, not merely to subjugate the Confederation, but to establish what he called the Ash Empire, with himself as its eternal sovereign. He's planning something beyond the military campaign, Riker confided during one of their clandestine meetings in the station's arboretum. There's a facility on Deck 17 that's off-limits to everyone except Killian and Talia. Even my override codes don't work. Whatever it is, it involves the Draconis, Mara replied, showing him her latest findings on her secure tablet. I've detected unusual neural patterns in the mature specimens. It's as if they're developing a collective consciousness. Their brainwaves are synchronizing during the feeding sessions. Riker frowned. Is that natural for their species? Nothing about this situation is natural, Mara said bitterly. But no, in their native environment, Draconis are solitary hunters. This kind of neural linkage is unprecedented. Their investigation was interrupted by a station-wide alert. Mara's tablet flashed with an emergency notification from the Draconis containment sector. They arrived to find chaos. One of the largest specimens had broken free of its restraints during a feeding session, its enhanced flame capabilities melting through the reinforced barriers as if they were made of wax. Security personnel fired suppression rounds at the creature, but its scales had grown too thick, too resilient from the specialized diet it had been subjected to. Mara watched in horror as the Draconis took flight within the vast chamber, its wings creating hurricane-force winds that sent equipment and people flying. Its eyes, once a clear, intelligent amber, now burned with an unnatural blue flame that matched the inferno building in its throat. "Everyone out!" Riker shouted, physically pushing researchers toward the exits. "Seal the sector!" Talia appeared at Mara's side, her usual composure shattered. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You've been interfering with the feeding protocols, haven't you?" Before Mara could respond, the Draconis unleashed its fury. A column of white-hot flame erupted from its jaws, engulfing the control platform where several technicians still struggled with emergency protocols. Their screams were mercifully brief. Through the observation window, Mara saw more Draconis stirring in their containment units, as if responding to some silent call. The neural synchronization she had observed was manifesting before her eyes, a collective awakening. "We need to evacuate the station," she told Riker as they retreated down a smoke-filled corridor. "If they all break free at once—" The rest of her sentence was drowned out by an explosion that rocked the entire structure. Emergency sirens wailed as the station's AI announced containment failures across multiple sectors. Killian's voice cut through the chaos, broadcasting on all channels. "This is not a defeat, but an evolution," he declared, his tone eerily calm amid the destruction. "The ascension has begun earlier than anticipated, but it cannot be stopped. All faithful, proceed to evacuation points Alpha through Delta. The time of fire is upon us." "What is he talking about?" Riker demanded, as they hurried toward the nearest escape pods, helping injured personnel along the way. "I don't know," Mara admitted. "But we need to find out before we leave. If Killian planned for this, if this breakout is part of his design somehow, we need to understand what comes next." They diverted from the evacuation route, fighting against the tide of fleeing staff members. Using Riker's security credentials, they accessed a maintenance shaft that would lead them toward Deck 17, the restricted area that might hold answers. As they climbed, the station shuddered around them. Through ventilation grates, they glimpsed Draconis of various sizes, soaring through the station's larger chambers, their combined flames turning the once sterile environment into an inferno. Yet there was a pattern to their destruction. They targeted security systems and weapons emplacements with unnerving precision, while largely avoiding areas where civilians were evacuating. "They're not just rampaging," Mara realized. "They're executing a coordinated attack. But how? Who's directing them?" The answer awaited them on Deck 17. The restricted facility had already been breached, its reinforced doors hanging from melted hinges. Inside, they found a circular chamber dominated by a massive device that pulsed with an unearthly blue light, the same color as the flame in the eyes of the escaped Draconis. At the center of the device stood Killian, his arms outstretched as energy coursed around him. Talia knelt at his feet, her expression one of rapturous devotion. "The communion is complete," Killian announced as he noticed their arrival. "You're just in time to witness the birth of a god, Dr. Vance." Mara stared at the pulsing device, her scientific mind racing to understand what she was seeing. "Neural transfer technology," she breathed. "You're linking your consciousness with the Draconis swarm." "Not just linking," Killian corrected her, his voice now carrying an echo, as if multiple voices spoke through him. "Becoming. The Draconis are magnificent creatures, but they lack purpose. I am giving them that purpose. Through me, they will burn away the corruption of the old world and forge the Ash Empire." Riker raised his weapon, but Talia was faster. Her stun baton caught him in the midsection, sending him crashing to the floor in a spasm of pain. "You never understood the grand design," Talia told Mara, circling her like a predator. "Killian doesn't merely want to control the Draconis. He is becoming their god, and they will burn worlds in his name." "The prototype you studied so carefully, Dr. Vance," Killian continued, his eyes beginning to glow with the same blue fire as the creature's, "was more than a test subject. It was the key, genetically modified to act as a psychic conduit between my consciousness and the entire species. Every feeding session strengthened the connection, and now I exist in each of them, and they in me." A violent tremor shook the chamber as something massive struck the station. Through the viewport, Mara saw a sight that stole her breath. Hundreds of Draconis, far more than she had known were on the station, swarming in formation around a colossal leader, the prototype that Killian had mentioned, now grown to impossible proportions. "The evacuation vessels will be spared," Killian said magnanimously. "My faithful will spread across the stars, preparing the way for the cleansing fire. You could still join us. Mara, your knowledge would be invaluable in the new order. Mara's eyes met Riker's as he struggled to his feet. In that silent exchange, a plan formed. What happens to the Draconis in this arrangement? She asked, stalling for time, as Riker inched toward a control panel. Are they willing participants in your godhood, or are they slaves to your will? A flicker of annoyance crossed Kalian's transfiguring face. They are becoming something greater through me, their primitive instincts refined into divine purpose. They're sentient beings, Mara countered, her voice rising with genuine anger. You've twisted them, tortured them, and now you're hijacking their consciousness. You're not creating gods, you're manufacturing slaves. Talia struck her then, a backhand that sent Mara sprawling. You will not blaspheme in the presence of the Ascended One. The distraction was enough. Riker reached the control panel and slammed his palm against the emergency override. Klaxons blared as the chamber's containment protocols activated, not to keep something out, but to keep Kalian in. Run! Riker shouted to Mara as he engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Talia, his military training evident in every precise movement. Mara hesitated, unwilling to abandon him, but the look in his eyes brooked no argument. She fled the chamber as energy surged through the neural transfer device, Kalian's enraged screams following her into the corridor. The escape pod bay was in chaos when she arrived. The last of the evacuation vessels were departing, filled beyond capacity with terrified personnel. Mara forced her way to a communication terminal, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Dr. Mara Vance of the Eden Initiative Research Station. We are experiencing a catastrophic containment failure of genetically modified Draconis specimens. The creatures are being controlled by Kalian through an experimental neural interface. He intends to use them as weapons against Confederation worlds. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. She had no way of knowing if her warning would reach the Confederation in time, but she had to try. As she finished her transmission, a deafening roar announced the arrival of a Draconis in the evacuation bay. Smaller than the giant she had seen through the viewport, but still large enough to fill the chamber with its presence. The creature fixed her with glowing blue eyes. Mara stood her ground, recognizing the distinctive pattern of scales around its throat. This was one of the first specimens she had studied, one she had spent countless hours observing and caring for before the weapons program began. I know you're in there somewhere, she said softly, even as the creature's mouth began to glow with gathering flame. This isn't what you are. You're not a weapon. You're not a god. You're a living being with a right to your own existence. The Draconis hesitated, its head tilting as if puzzled by her words, or perhaps by the lack of fear in her voice. A movement behind the creature caught Mara's attention. Riker, bloodied but alive, slipped into the chamber, signaling for her to keep the Draconis distracted. Remember who you were, Mara continued, taking a cautious step toward the creature. Before the feeding, before Kalian, you soared through the skies of your homeworld, free and wild. That's still inside you. The blue glow in the Draconis' eyes flickered, alternating between Kalian's unnatural fire and its natural amber. Confusion and pain radiated from the magnificent being as it fought an internal battle for its identity. Riker seized the moment, activating the bay's emergency purge system. Decompression warnings flashed as the outer doors began to open, creating a powerful vacuum that would expel anything not secured into the void of space. Mara lunged for a safety harness as the air rushed from the chamber. The Draconis, too large to resist the pull, was swept toward the opening. At the last moment, its wings unfurled, catching the outflow and transforming its uncontrolled tumble into deliberate flight. As it vanished into space, Mara caught a final glimpse of its eyes, clear amber, free of Kalian's influence, if only for a moment. The emergency bulkheads slammed shut, restoring atmosphere to the chamber. Riker helped Mara to her feet, his expression grim. "Talia," she asked. "She won't be following us," he replied, the set of his jaw telling Mara not to ask for details. "But Kalian. The transfer was complete before I could disrupt it. He's out there now, in all of them." Together, they secured the last remaining escape pod, launching away from the disintegrating research station just as the largest Draconis, the one Kalian had called the prototype, unleashed a torrent of flame that engulfed the structure entirely. As their small vessel hurtled through space, they watched the swarm of Draconis form a perfect geometric pattern around their massive leader. Then, as one, they accelerated beyond light speed, vanishing in a flash that left burning afterimages on Mara's retinas. "They're heading for Helios Prime," Riker said grimly. Just as he planned. Mara's mind raced, calculating the odds, searching for a solution. "We need to warn them, and we need to find a way to break Kalian's control over the Draconis."
"How? You saw what happened back there. He's literally inside their heads now."
"Yes, but did you notice? The one in the bay, its eyes changed when I spoke to it. There's still a connection to their original consciousness. If we can amplify that, disrupt Kalian's signal somehow." Their pod's communication system crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. A voice, distorted by interference but recognizable as Talia's, came through. "Dr. Vance. Riker. If you can hear this. He lied to us all." The transmission was punctuated by bursts of static. "The communion isn't what he claimed. He's not elevating the Draconis. He's consuming them, their consciousness, their life force, to extend his own existence. The Ash Empire is just a shell for his immortality." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving Mara and Riker staring at each other in stunned silence. "Can that be true?" Riker finally asked.
"Is that even possible?"
"Theoretically, yes," Mara replied, her scientific mind already processing the implications. The neural transfer technology could be modified to absorb rather than merge. If Kalian found a way to integrate the Draconis' regenerative capabilities into his own consciousness, then he's not just controlling them, he's feeding on them, Riker concluded, using their lives to fuel his immortality. The revelation changed everything. What had seemed like religious fanaticism was actually something far more sinister, and potentially more vulnerable. If Kalian was parasitically linked to the Draconis, there might be a way to turn that connection against him. Their pod's navigation system indicated they were on a trajectory toward Nexus Station, a neutral trading post that had somehow survived the collapse. There, they might find transportation to Helios Prime, if they could reach it before Kalian's Draconis Armada. The journey took 3 days, during which Mara and Riker pieced together what they knew, formulating a desperate plan. When they finally docked at Nexus Station, they were met with news that confirmed their worst fears. Helios Prime was under attack. The Draconis swarm had descended upon the system's outermost settlements, leaving nothing but ash and molten rock in their wake. More disturbing were the reports of a new religion spreading among the survivors of these attacks, the doctrine of holy fire, whose adherents claimed that salvation could only be achieved through purification by flame. Kalian was not merely destroying the Confederation, he was converting its people to his twisted faith. Using Riker's old military contacts, they secured passage on a fast scout ship bound for the Helios system. The vessel's captain, a grizzled veteran named Lorna Kai, had her own reasons for joining their mission, family, on one of the planets in Kalian's path. "If even half of what you're telling me is true," she told them as they prepared for departure, "then this Kalian is worse than the collapse itself. At least that was a natural disaster. This is a perversion," Mara corrected her grimly. "The collapse wasn't natural. It was engineered. A failed attempt at controlling cosmic energies that backfired catastrophically." The same arrogance that drives Kalian drove those responsible for the collapse. Riker gave her a sharp look. This was not something she had shared with him before. "How do you know that?" he asked, once they were alone in the ship's cramped crew quarters. Mara's eyes were haunted as she answered. "Because my parents were part of the team that caused it. They were working on an experimental energy source, one derived from the same stellar materials we use to feed the Draconis. They thought they could harness it safely. They were wrong." The confession hung between them, a shadow from Mara's past that suddenly illuminated her present actions. Her dedication to the Draconis, her resistance to Kalian's weapons program. It wasn't just scientific principle. It was atonement. "That's why you joined the initiative," Riker realized. Not just to study the Draconis, but to ensure the technology wasn't misused again.
"And I failed," Mara said bitterly. "Just like my parents. I saw the signs, but I didn't stop it in time."
Riker's hand found hers in the dim light of the cabin. "We haven't failed yet. We're still fighting." Their arrival in the Helios system revealed the full horror of Kalian's crusade. The outer planets had been reduced to smoldering ruins, their surfaces transformed into landscapes of glass and ash. The Confederation fleet that had risen to defend the system was scattered, their ships either destroyed or fleeing deeper into protected space. And at the heart of the destruction flew the Draconis swarm, now thousands strong. Somehow, Kalian had accelerated their reproduction cycle, creating new warriors for his unholy army at an impossible rate. At the center of the formation was the massive prototype, now grown to the size of a small moon, its scales gleaming with reflected starlight. "How do we fight that?" Captain Kai whispered, as they observed from the edge of the system, their small vessel cloaked by experimental technology that Riker had borrowed from the initiative. "We don't," Mara replied. "We save them." Her plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Using the research she had compiled on the Draconis neural patterns, Mara proposed to create a countersignal, one that would disrupt Kalian's control by amplifying the creature's original consciousness. But to broadcast it effectively, they would need to get close to the prototype, the focal point of the psychic network. "That's suicide," Riker objected. "Even with the cloaking tech, we'll be incinerated the moment we get near that thing." "Not if we time it right," Mara insisted. "The feeding cycle creates a period of vulnerability. When Kalian draws energy from the Draconis, the connection goes both ways. For a few moments, his consciousness is stretched thin across the entire swarm." "And how exactly do you know when this feeding cycle occurs?" Captain Kai demanded. Mara pointed to her data tablet, which displayed readings from a small device she had salvaged from the research station. This was designed to monitor the neural patterns of the Draconis during feeding sessions. It's still picking up signals, stronger now, but with the same cyclic pattern. The plan took shape quickly, born of desperation and the rapidly closing window of opportunity. While Captain Kai modified her ship's communication array to broadcast Mara's countersignal, Riker prepared for the possibility that they might need to fight their way out, or at least buy enough time for the signal to take effect. "There's something else you should know," Mara told him as they made their final preparations. "If this works, if we break Kalian's control, the Draconis won't just become docile. They'll be confused, angry, and possibly still violent. We're not solving the problem. We're just changing its nature." Riker checked the charge on his pulse rifle, his expression resolute. "One problem at a time. Dr. Vance, first, we dethrone a god." Their approach to the Draconis swarm was tense, the scout ship's engines reduced to minimal power to avoid detection. Around them, the devastation of the Helios system stretched in all directions, planets reduced to cinders, space stations torn apart, the debris of shattered lives floating in the void. The massive prototype hung at the center of it all, its form now barely recognizable as the creature Mara had once studied. Kalian's influence, had transformed it into something monstrous, a perversion of nature that radiated malevolent power. "The feeding cycle is beginning," Mara announced, her eyes fixed on her monitoring device. 30 seconds to optimal broadcast window. Captain Kai positioned the ship as close as she dared, the cloaking field straining against the intense energy radiating from the Draconi swarm. "Ready when you are, Doctor." Riker stood at the weapon controls, though all three of them knew their armaments would be useless against the creatures outside. His presence was a comfort nonetheless, a reminder that not all soldiers fought for conquest. Some fought to protect. "Initiating broadcast, now," Mara said, activating the signal. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a ripple spreading across water, a visible wave of disturbance passed through the Draconi swarm. The smaller creatures faltered in their precise formation, their synchronized movements becoming erratic. The prototype, however, showed no sign of disruption. Instead, it turned slowly toward their position, as if sensing their presence despite the cloaking technology. "It sees us," Captain Kai warned, her hands moving across the controls to prepare for evasive maneuvers. "Impossible," Riker muttered. "The cloak is still functional." "It's not seeing us with its eyes," Mara realized, watching as the massive creature oriented itself directly toward their ship. "It's sensing the counter-signal. Kalian knows what we're trying to do." The prototype's mouth began to glow with gathering flame, a sight that Mara had witnessed countless times in the laboratory, but never at this scale. The energy building within the creature would vaporize their ship instantly, cloaking field or no. "Evasive action!" Riker shouted, but Captain Kai was already moving, sending the scout ship into a spiraling dive that strained its structural integrity. The blast of flame passed overhead, close enough that the ship's external temperature sensors registered a momentary spike beyond their measurement capacity. Alarms blared throughout the vessel as systems overloaded and failed. "The signal!" Mara cried. "Is it still broadcasting?" Captain Kai checked her instruments. "Barely. The communication array is at 15% functionality and falling." "It's not strong enough," Mara said, despair threatening to overwhelm her. "The prototype is too powerful, too deeply connected to Kalian." Outside, the smaller Draconis were beginning to recover from the initial disruption, their formations re-establishing under Kalian's control. Soon, they would join the prototype in hunting down the source of the counter-signal. In that moment of imminent defeat, an unexpected transmission cut through the chaos, a voice Mara had never expected to hear again. "Dr. Vance," Talia's voice was weak but determined. "I am approaching your position in an initiative shuttle. My vessel is equipped with a Class 4 amplifier. If we combine our signals—" Mara exchanged a shocked glance with Riker. "Talia, how did you survive? How did you find us?" "There's no time," Talia replied. "Kalian left me for dead, but I know how to hurt him. The prototype, it has a resonance frequency. During my time as his disciple, I helped develop it. If we target that frequency with your counter-signal—" Understanding dawned on Mara's face. "We could create a feedback loop in the neural network. The prototype would become a broadcaster for our signal, instead of his." "Exactly. But I need to get closer than you can safely go. And I need your signal pattern." Captain Kai shook her head in disbelief. "This is insane. Why would you help us? You were his most devoted follower." "Because I was deceived," Talia answered, her voice breaking. "What Kalian promised, a new beginning, a perfect order, was a lie. He doesn't want to save the galaxy. He wants to consume it, just as he's consuming the Draconis. I've seen what he truly is, and I cannot serve that abomination." Mara made her decision quickly, transmitting the counter-signal pattern to Talia's shuttle. "What's your plan?" "A direct approach," Talia replied grimly. "The initiative shuttle's engines can be modified to create an explosive reaction. if I can reach the prototype's primary neural cluster, located at the base of its skull. The combined force of the explosion and the amplified signal should disrupt Kalian's control long enough for the Draconis' natural consciousness to reassert itself. That's a suicide mission, Riker stated flatly.
Yes, Talia agreed. It is. Consider it my atonement.
Before they could argue further, Talia's shuttle deactivated its cloaking field and accelerated toward the prototype, its engines flaring with unnatural brightness as she pushed them beyond their design specifications. The reaction from the swarm was immediate. Dozens of smaller Draconis broke formation to intercept the approaching vessel, their synchronized movements betraying Kalian's alarm. "We need to help her," Mara insisted. "Broadcast the counter signal at maximum power. Give her a fighting chance." Captain Kai nodded, diverting emergency power to the damaged communication array. The ship groaned in protest as the overtaxed systems strained to comply. On their view screen, they watched Talia's shuttle weave through the attacking Draconis, taking hits but somehow maintaining its trajectory toward the prototype. The vessel was burning now, parts of its hull glowing red from the heat of both damage and its overcharged engines. "She's not going to make it," Riker said, his soldier's eye calculating the odds and finding them insurmountable. But Mara saw something else, a pattern in the movements of the smaller Draconis. Some were actively hindering others, creating brief gaps in the defensive swarm. The counter signal was having an effect, however small. "They're fighting back," she breathed. "Not all of them, but some. They're resisting Kalian's control." Talia's shuttle, now more a meteor of flame than a functional spacecraft, slipped through the final defensive line and struck the prototype exactly where she had aimed, the base of its massive skull, where Mara's research had identified the central neural cluster. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space, but its effects radiated outward like a shockwave. The prototype convulsed, its enormous body contorting in ways that defied its biological structure. From its mouth, a stream of blue fire erupted, not directed at any target, but as if it were vomiting out the very essence of Kalian's influence. Throughout the swarm, chaos ensued. Some Draconis fell into seizure-like spasms, while others turned on their neighbors in sudden, inexplicable rage. The perfect formation dissolved into a maelstrom of flame and confusion. "It's working," Mara whispered, watching as the counter-signal readings spiked across her instruments. "Talia's sacrifice amplified the signal beyond anything we could have achieved." The prototype's movements became increasingly erratic, its wings beating against the void as if fighting an invisible enemy. Through the scout ship's sensors, Mara detected a profound shift in its neural patterns, the structured, artificial rhythms imposed by Kalian giving way to something wilder, more natural. Then, with a final convulsion that seemed to ripple through its entire massive form, the prototype unleashed a psychic scream that needed no air to be felt. The remaining instrumentation on the scout ship shorted out in a cascade of sparks, and Mara clutched her head in pain as the death throes of Kalian's consciousness washed over them. When they recovered, the scene outside had transformed. The Draconis swarm had dispersed, individual creatures flying in seemingly random directions, their movements no longer synchronized but distinctly individual. The prototype drifted motionless, its once glowing eyes dark and lifeless. "Is it dead?" Captain Kai asked, her voice hushed. Mara checked her few remaining functional instruments. "No. It's in some kind of stasis. Its life signs are minimal, but present." "And Kalian?" Riker pressed.
"I don't know," Mara admitted. "If his consciousness was fully merged with the neural network, and that network has been disrupted." They had no time to contemplate the implications. The ship's proximity alerts, one of the few systems still functioning, warned of approaching vessels, a Confederation response fleet, finally arriving to defend what remained of the Helios system. Captain Kai opened a communication channel, identifying themselves and requesting assistance.
As she negotiated their safe passage, Mara continued to study the readings from the dispersing Draconis. They're not just flying randomly, she realized. They're forming smaller groups, but not by size or type. It's as if they're sorting themselves by family lines, maybe, returning to their natural social structures. What happens now? Riker asked, coming to stand beside her. To them? To us? Mara had no easy answers. The Draconis were free of Kalian's control, but they remained dangerous. Powerful beings capable of devastating destruction, now traumatized by their experience of enslavement. The Confederation would view them as weapons to be eliminated or controlled. The survivors of Kalian's Ash Empire might still worship them as divine beings. We start again, she said finally. Not with control or worship, but with understanding. The Draconis aren't inherently weapons or gods. They're living beings with their own nature, their own purpose. You think the Confederation will see it that way? After what's happened here? Mara's gaze was drawn to the prototype, still floating in silent stasis amid the debris of battle. They'll listen to evidence, and we have plenty of that. In the days that followed, as the Confederation authorities debriefed them and began the monumental task of assessing the damage to the Helios system, Mara presented her case. Using the data she had salvaged from the research station and the evidence of Kalian's crimes, she argued passionately for a new approach to the Draconis, one based on respect rather than exploitation. To her surprise, she found allies among the Confederation scientists and even some military leaders who had witnessed the horrific consequences of attempting to weaponize the creatures. The prototype was placed under quarantine for study, with Mara appointed as the lead researcher in a joint Confederation independent initiative. Riker, offered a position in the Confederation's security forces, chose instead to join Mara's research team. His experience with both military operations and the Eden Initiative made him uniquely qualified to help establish protocols for safe interaction with the Draconis. 6 months after the fall of Kalian's short-lived Ash Empire, Mara stood on the observation deck of a new research vessel, watching as a small group of Draconis soared through the atmosphere of an uninhabited planet designated as a sanctuary for the species. Their flames, now returned to their natural colors, painted the sky with brief, beautiful arcs of light. They're thriving, Riker noted, joining her at the viewport. The latest surveys show increasing numbers in all 3 sanctuary zones, and no sign of the neural synchronization returning, Mara added. Whatever Kalian did to create that effect died with him, or at least with his control over the prototype. The prototype itself remained in stasis, neither alive nor dead in any conventional sense. Occasionally, its neural patterns would show brief spikes of activity, but these were becoming less frequent over time. Whether some fragment of Kalian's consciousness lingered within its massive form, or whether it was simply the creature's own mind, slowly healing, Mara could not yet determine. Do you think we've seen the last of him? Riker asked. The question that had hung between them for months, finally given voice. Mara considered her answer carefully. I think Kalian was a symptom of something deeper, the same arrogance that led to the collapse, the belief that power justifies control, that some are destined to rule while others are meant to serve. As long as that belief exists, there will be others like him. That's not very reassuring. She smiled, taking his hand in hers. It wasn't meant to be, but we're more prepared now, more aware of the dangers, and that's something. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from the research team monitoring the prototype. Unusual activity had been detected, not in the creature itself, but in the space around it. Some kind of signal was emanating from its dormant form, directed toward a specific point in deep space, beyond the charted regions of the Chrysalix galaxy. Could it be Kalian? Riker asked as they hurried to the research bay. I don't think so, Mara replied, studying the preliminary data on her tablet. This signal doesn't match anything in our records, not Kalian's neural patterns,
not the Draconis' natural communications. Nothing we've encountered before. When they reached the monitoring station, the situation became clearer and more concerning. The signal was not originating from the prototype at all, but merely being relayed through it, amplified by its unique biological structure. The actual source lay somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, its nature and purpose unknown. "It's like it's calling for something," one of the junior researchers suggested, pointing to the cyclic pattern of the transmission. "Or signaling that something has changed." Mara felt a chill as she recognized the implication. "Or reporting that a threat has been eliminated. The Draconis weren't native to our galaxy. We always assumed they were transplanted somehow. But what if they were sent? What if Kalian's actions interfered with some larger plan?" As if in response to her words, the free Draconis across all 3 sanctuary planets suddenly took flight, forming into geometric patterns reminiscent of their behavior under Kalian's control, but distinctly different, more fluid, more natural, yet no less purposeful. "They're answering the call," Riker realized. "Whatever it is, they recognize it." Mara watched as the creatures soared higher into the atmosphere, gathering in numbers that darkened the skies of their sanctuaries. Her scientific curiosity warred with a growing sense of foreboding. They had freed the Draconis from one form of control only to discover that perhaps they had always been part of something larger, something older and vaster than human understanding. As the Draconis began to accelerate beyond the planet's gravity wells, forming a massive, cohesive flock that stretched across space like a living constellation, Mara made her decision. Whatever was coming, whatever had sent the Draconis in the first place, and was now calling them home or to some new purpose, humanity needed to be prepared. "We need to follow them," she told Riker, her voice steady despite the uncertainty ahead. "Not to control, not to exploit, but to understand." He nodded, the soldier in him recognizing the mission, the man in him sharing her determination. "Where they go, we go." The prototype, as if sensing the imminent departure of its kin, finally stirred from its months-long stasis. Its massive eyes opened, no longer burning with Kalian's blue fire, but glowing with an ancient, amber light that seemed to hold the wisdom of stars. It regarded the humans monitoring it with an intelligence that transcended mere animal awareness, then turned its gaze to the void beyond, toward whatever was calling. The cycle of fire had ended. A new journey was beginning. In the vastness of space, the Draconis flew free, their flames illuminating the darkness not as weapons of destruction, but as beacons of life, complex, mysterious, and ultimately beyond human control. And in their wake followed those humans wise enough to have learned the most important lesson, that true understanding comes not from domination, but from respect. The universe had survived Kalian's attempted godhood. What awaited beyond the boundaries of the known remained to be seen. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Mara Vance faced them with the knowledge that had guided her from the beginning. Life, in all its forms, deserves the chance to follow its own path, even when that path leads into mystery.